Well, let's see what the news of the day is. Well, one, how about this? It says individuals frighten the collective, but not near as much as the collective frightens individuals. There was also another news item somewhere. By the way, somebody corrected me. I mentioned the other day the other news machine, the wire machine I said was, the one in the back was connected to, I think I said Europe. Somebody did correct me. It's not connected to Europe. It is connected to Southwest Antarctica, is what that other one. Well, I knew that. But there was another one that said that only one thing to an individual, and by individual, you recall, we're not speaking about somebody that simply dresses differently and acts strange. We're talking about intellectually. We're talking about the difference between people who think simply tied into the general network of the intellect of humanity in general, which has its own system, which has literally its own intelligence. And an individual, to speak crudely, we're just trying to make some comparison, somebody who would be thinking in some way that was not on the general menu. And the other item from the Antarctic wire point out that to an individual there'd only be one thing that's not funny, and that would be his loss of individuality, whatever the hell that would be. You can think about that. But that would be the only thing that would be possibly not funny, not serious. So back to this one, perhaps we'll find some connection, and perhaps we won't. Perhaps a meteor will hit us before we have to come up with it. Individuals frighten the collective, but not near as much as the collective frightens individuals. If you recall, last time we were mentioning that what generally passes amongst ordinary, sane people, civilized people, for being originality, for any form of talent, has to be within certain parameters, or as they say in Brazil, perimeters. But down there they say odometer. So, go figure. That what passes for individuality, what passes for some sort of original thought, has to be within the framework that it does not frighten the collective. Frighten just being a word, it has to be to the point that the cows themselves, the herd of humanity, must feel that those apparently up to something new are not up too far. That is, they're not up any further than the cows can look up and see that, well, this would-be new thinker, this would-be person with some original talent, at least has gone no higher than our shoulders. That the change that the person is attempting to delineate is not so drastic that we cannot see where it came from. If it did, and all this could be true simultaneously, if someone could propose change, and it would have to be an individual because the collective would not do it to itself, but if an individual could propose a kind of change, come up with new ideas that were so drastic as to be dangerous to the collective stability, and they could hear it, which they couldn't, but if they could, that would be the real fright in this sense, that individuals frighten the collective. Rather than just making it sound as though we're speaking theoretically, surely all of you know it, especially historically, that is after the fact, there are constant references wherein someone frightened somebody. Galileo, just the first one that comes to mind, seemed to have frightened the powers of the Catholic Church at that time. According to history, you all know the story, but there are many others that the church, being the political power, the power that it was at the time, and it determined what was truth and what was reality, even scientifically in the West. And here came a guy along whose idea was drastically different, that he was going in contradistinction to what the church said was God's plan as witnessed by the Bible, and etc. And so it was considered to be, after the fact, I'm just relating history, just take myths and fairy tales and history for what they are. You don't have to worry about whether it happened, because somebody thought it happened. Is that the powers, in this case, the collective, found this idea to be too dangerous. It was too original. And of course, they had certain ways to deal with him, such as, take that back tomorrow, we'll kill you. And he said, well, I'd been thinking about revising the whole plan. I'd had second thoughts. So, historically, all I wanted you to see was that there is a basis for this. It's not something I simply pulled out of thin air, which of course I did originally, but then I had to back up and find some way that made it sound like it could have been true, see? Which is one of the few purposes of history and old socks, which we don't have time to pursue that one, which are the same thing. But the thing is, history, the collective consciousness, intelligence of humanity is already aware of this, that apparently, you don't see it in your lifetime, which is something else if you want to consider what seems to be the sequence of real time as felt by ordinary intelligence. You do not find it happening in your lifetime, but everyone who's well-read at all, just generally well-read, can find examples, and think of your own, such as the one I pulled out about Galileo and the church, wherein it seemed as though some individual somewhere had an idea, had a plan, or even an ability or a talent. It doesn't have to be as apparently dramatic as somebody's philosophy of the cosmos conflicting with the church. It could be just simply a painter. A musician shows up. Some guy starts writing symphonies that people say, wait a minute, that's no symphony. That's too drastic. And the critics just dismiss him. Or when it's really too drastic, they'll do more than dismiss him. They'll begin to attack him. That something's got to be done. This is the very sort of thing that's going to ruin music. So you can find it that this does happen after the fact. But one more time, it's of some interest. You should note that it does not happen contemporaneously. You cannot see it happening. But after the fact, it does appear that individuals have popped up throughout history that frighten the collective. But then you've got to take, and the rest of this news item points out that frighten is not really the right word for a real thinker. But that's all you can call it to start with, so that you've got some grasp of what's going on. You've got to say, well, it did something. Or the collective would not have even noticed it, but they find it frightening. And so you apparently have, if you can think about it without any kind of, once you get past the frightening, because you've got to get past any belligerence, you've got to get past any kind of teenage hostility toward the collective and think, well, I know what you're saying, that every time you try to be an individual, I started growing a ponytail and tying my hair up about 7 or 8 years ago, whenever it was, some guy says. And boy, everybody around me at work, they told me, listen, you're not going to work for IBM if you're going to dress like that. What's wrong? All this thing about the collective, that's not it. It's not that kind of rebellion. So if you understand the news item to start and say that individuals frighten the collective, and then get past the point of frightened, because it's not partisan, it's not that they're actually frightened, but that's the best that history can make of it. That's the best that ordinary thought can make of it, is, yeah, you try to be yourself. And sure enough, they'll try to run a lawnmower of you. They want to make everybody have the same hairstyle. They want everybody to wear blue suits to work. They want everybody... That's an old story. A very old story. And if you think that's what you're rebelling against, So it's not, the word is not correctly frightened, but let's press on, since that's what the news item says, and they must know what they're doing, is individuals frighten the collective. It is that if we could have it both ways, we could have it all three ways, that individuals could pop up. And of course, if you get good, you can forget individuals and humanity, and Galileo is individuals and in the church. It's all in you, that you have ideas and you think of something in your church. All the sane people in you, the collective intelligence in you, which is the foundation of you being sane and being a person and getting this far, the rest of it goes, oh, come on. You're having flashbacks from the 60s. And that LSD is still floating around somewhere in your system. Snap out of it. It's as though the church tells you, no, that's too drastic. So the individual, what is representing metaphorically or symbolically at least, let's say, in this news item, individuals frighten the collective, is anything that is running in such a way that it would be substantially dangerous to the foundations of sanity, of whatever present sanity, present reality, present collective thinking. It is frightening because it is dangerous if it actually could go anywhere. So individuals frighten the collective, but not near as much as the collective frightens the individual. Might I suggest, from a certain view, the last part is what gets down to something worthwhile, and, well, besides the rest of it being an interesting prelude, is what frightens the individual is the collective, once you see it. One more time, frightened is not the word, because if you've got any ability, even the potential to ever think for yourself, you can't be frightened. I mean, it's just not part of the game. The only thing that you should be frightened by is death. And if you're frightened by death, you're a sissy to start with. Get out. But I suggest, since the machine's off and is not going to argue with me, that there is a kind of more serious reality now behind frighten, the word frighten, of what the collective does to the individual. Because if you are trying to think in a nonpartisan way, if you're trying to be able to do something with a mind that is not generally available, then what should be frightening? What is your biggest roadblock, to understate it? Because there's only one. Now, ordinary people, if they were trying to follow this on a different level, they'd start on this stuff about, well, it's the corporate mentality, the kind of thing that I was just pulling out an example of people saying, yes, I'm sick of being pushed around by life. I studied and got my MBA and then end up wanting to be somebody, wanting to be creative. I go to work for Apple or IBM or Macintosh. 2 or 3 days into my job, they're telling me, listen, I'm sorry, but the third-level manager has pointed out that we do not here at IBM wear red ties to the office. Okay? And the person says, I'm not going to be pushed around like that. They're trying to turn us all into just cookie-cutted men in gray flannel suits all look alike, that I'm not going to put up with it. And they would say, an ordinary person taking this, they would say, well, that's the kind of fright that the individual has about the corporate, the mass mentality of life. Yeah, that's a cheap example. That's a childish example. But if you saw past all that and you do realize, well, I'm trying to think, I'm trying to scratch where the collective can't reach. I'm trying to scratch myself that the collective can't even seem to tell me where the itch is. All I know is I'm itching, and nobody can tell me where to reach. And if you try to do that, there is, behind the word fright, there is a kind of something or other. To try and be independently minded and to realize what you're confronted with. Not IBM. That's child's play. Not even the whole entire government. How about everything that exists? Does that get anywhere close to frightening? How about impressive? How about noteworthy? If you don't like, so even I don't like frightening, but when you realize, well, I'm trying to do something. I've been calling it thinking independently. We could call it many things. I was going to call it a hot deli sandwich, and I found out that somebody down the street was already using that description, so we'll call it being independent-minded or attempting to. In that case, what is referred to in this news item as the collective, and to get past the term frightening, how about noteworthy? That when you realize that what I'm trying to do is like the world's biggest rigged poker game. I have sat down here with a clear conscience, fairly clear mind, clean underwear, and as they say in Southern theological schools, not mad at nobody, trying to think off on my own, and I have sat down here at a game with people who look just, decent and honest. That's the collective, the same people that seem to be about as decent a group as you could get. And I've only begun to play a few hands, and I realize this game is rigged. But here we go again. Rigged's not even the word. I know. There is no word, but rigged's not even the word. Because if you can see it all, if you can think it all, you would go through such a stage as realizing, wait a minute, this game's rigged. But then you realize yourself that rigged's not the word because they don't know it's rigged. Or another way to put it, all the games in the collective casino are rigged. They're already weighted. They're already partisan. And it's not just this game. In other words, if you take it personally, then you're part of the rigging. Then you're part of the collective. And any fright you have after that, you're back to the level of, what do you mean I've got to take off my red tie? Not me, I'm an individual. You won't do this to me. Well, maybe you'll do it. I won't wear a red tie, but I'm going to be pissed about it. I'll talk about your mama. I'll think about it. I'll even look for another job, maybe. It is the noteworthiness. It is the realization that what you're trying to do, under whatever name it was called, is, well, it makes Sisyphus look like a sissy. I mean, you're not trying to push a rock uphill every day. You're trying to push a hill uphill. There is something extremely, somewhere between noteworthy, impressive, and frightening then, of someone attempting to think independently, to be an individual intellectually, whatever that would be, and to realize what you're faced with. Because you're not faced with anything specific. It's not that you're sitting at this poker table, to go back to that one, and that you look over and wait a minute, there's one guy that's cheating, that you reach over and you pick out, let's say, an institution. Wait a minute. I know what's wrong. It's religion. Religion's been dogging me all these years, and me trying to have faith in it, and it turns out I'm just sure it's a fraud. That's what's in my way. Or my social position, or my parents, my background, that you pick out somebody. If you can do that, you're all right. You're safe. But if you realize the problem, the noteworthiness of the collective, is that there is no particular person, there is nothing partisan, there is nothing identifiable opposed to what you're doing. That's why it's safe to be part of the collective, because you can always find an opponent. There is always an answer. That somebody could listen to this last 20 minutes, an ordinary person, and say, well, I know what you mean. I've taken drugs, I've tried to follow different religions, I've read books on philosophies, and there is something I'm trying to do, but I don't know. Some way the cosmos, the gods, fate, somebody has waited, somebody has rigged the game in such a way that's making it extremely difficult for me to get anywhere with this. And so if you ask an ordinary person, if you say, well, I can dig where you're coming from, I think people talk like that. They used to right outside of Buenos Aires. And you say, all right, I hear what you're saying. Exactly who? Now this person will have some general idea. Because they're saying, remember, you're never stuck for an answer. So they would have some general area to identify as where the opposition is coming from. Do you understand? I mean, you've been doing it. I say, do you understand? You have operationally proved you understand because you put up with it all these years. As long as you can do that, you're all right. And by all right, you understand what I mean by all right. That means you're not going anywhere. You'll probably stay sane. Yeah. You'll probably live out your days. You'll probably get older and get more and more pissed and convinced that you were right all along about something. Well, at least you're right about the fact that everybody else was wrong. You knew. There's no doubt about that. But as long as there's an identifiable opposition, you are literally safe. As long as you feel like, well, I'm sitting here at the table of life, and this game is rigged, there's no doubt, and I know at least one, maybe more, but all you got to do is I know one player. I don't want to look over there now because it's religion, it's politics, it's justice, almost anything you can name. And you say, I don't want to look over there now and let on. But I know who's rigged this game. I know why I didn't get anywhere. Just, it's two seats to my right. Don't look, but it's religion. It's some form of the collective. It's one of the herds, all dressed up. As long as you can do that, you're all right. As long as you actually believe that there is something in opposition, something I can identify, something I know about. Not just me, I'm not a crackpot. Many people feel this way. Many people, ordinary people, feel the same way, that there is some kind of something funny going on, perhaps even a conspiracy. As long as you feel that way, you're all right. You'll die there in your chair. They'll bring you a drink just before you go. If you got enough time, maybe some smiling face will say, you want me to cash in your chips just before you die, which should make you feel a lot better. But you feel as though that there is some justification for having sat there all these years, for having never gotten up, which of course you can't, but you always threaten, well, hey, I'm going to quit playing. Well, of course, there is always that great fallback position known as suicide, if you want to hold yourself hostage for ransom from life and expect it to send the ransom, like, listen, I've had enough of this. You better send me an answer, at least some money, or I'm warning you, I'm not going to put up with this much longer. Anybody cares to try that? But as long as you feel as though that there was some reason, somewhere you can, in essence, lay the blame, then explains that you sat there for 60, 70 years. I kept thinking I was trying to win the game. I kept thinking I was trying to go somewhere. I was trying to think of something different. I was trying to be less dogmatic. I was trying to be less partisan. I was trying to be less belligerent. And every time I would try, something would happen. And I know about the source. It normally comes down somewhere between theology, psychology, politicalology, sociology, financialology. But you say, I know what's going on. Everybody's sitting at this table. Not everyone's playing fair like me. As long as you feel that way, you'll sit there. As long as you feel that way, you'll sit there, and every time that you think about it or somebody asks you, I thought you were trying to, I saw you 10 years ago and you were threatening to get out of here and go do something. I know, but I'm so deep into it now. They've been cheating me now for the last 10 years. Yeah, I told you I was going to leave the table and I was going to get out of Vegas, Atlantic City, and I was going somewhere else and do something new. But I'm going to tell you what, they have robbed me blind. And I'm determined I'm going to sit here at least until I break even. Now I'm getting out of here because I know who's up to this. And all you're saying is I'm going to sit here until I figure out religion. I'm going to get smarter than one of the institutions of life. I'm going to get smarter than life. But you remember from last time, it was a little news item. It was on one of the machines about, well, I guess it was a fable, wasn't it? A myth from some reality that said on real slow days, this one reality used to let people imagine. Some of the people in the herd let them imagine that it was smarter than it was. The person sitting there for all these years ends up with that sort of feeling if they had to describe it. But if you begin to see that, back to the news item, that is the real fright. The little sort of figurative speech of starting out this item that said individuals frighten the collective. Yeah. But also I tried to cover that in my opening little joke, historical joke about Galileo and the church saying, hey, we don't like this. And him think, I'm a scientist. What do you mean? The truth, you don't have to like the truth. I just stated the truth. I made the observations, and the church says, that's fine. But the way we look at it, you're either going to change your mind or we're going to burn you at the stake tomorrow. And he said, well, wait a minute. See, that is how much the individual frightens the collective. Just that much. That the collective may have to go to all the effort to tell the individual, by the way, stop this or tomorrow we'll cut off your tongue and pull out your toenails and make you listen to industrial rock music on an AM station. And the person goes, well, I don't know why, but I suddenly began to see the light. That's how much, when it comes to it, that the individual frightens the collective, disturbs the collective. But conversely, with all ergo, on the other hand, if you're trying to think for yourself, there is more substance to look at what the collective can do to you without even trying. Because that's another little interesting aspect. If you're starting out trying to be somewhat rebellious and you can identify who is cheating at the table and who's holding you back, you also, may I understate it and say there is a great tendency for such a person to take it very personally, that life is almost, now I know I'm not maybe alone, but life in particular has singled me out because it understands that I'm on the verge of having things figured out. I have some kind of exceptional talent. I have unusual insight. And for some reason, life has kind of picked me out. And it normally goes from that into thinking, they tend to begin to think of gods and like, well, this is some kind of challenge. It's like the gods want to see how long I'll sit here and be robbed blind and talked about and cheated, and dogs go by and piss on my boots, and they deal me, 4 cards instead of 5, and then they say, what would you like to drink? And they bring me watered down drinks. And it's a small step from sitting there and being cheated out of any possibility of being an individual, but also begin to feel martyred. Justifiably, though, in a challenging way, that life just wants to see how much crap I'll put up with, as if life had to. I mean, life's going to hold its breath, waiting to see how much crap you'll put up with. Life's waiting. Reality is waiting. That you've already told it, in essence, hey, I'm telling you, I've had enough of this crap. You either straighten up, or I'm going to do this. There's a certain thing, if you're dealing with like polarized energy, if you're dealing with a substratum of reality, if we were dealing, let's say we're all floating around in a 5-dimensional ocean, and if you're looking at it from a 3D way, then the ocean itself, reality, the universe, is as though it's a closed-loop, self-fueling system that runs at 100% efficiency, which is impossible, I know. But compared to how you look at it, it does. Back to where we were, in case you lost your place, you threatening to shoot yourself to life, I can make it sound kind of dramatic and funny, life going, oh, please don't. You're not going anywhere. I mean, holding yourself for ransom, like, well, I'll hold my breath, I'll shoot myself, or I'll think exceptionally dumb thoughts. More than usual. A next dimensional reality within a X plus has got no way to harm the larger reality. There's no way that you can hurt the game. There's actually no way that the individual can frighten the collective. But conversely, there is almost a way that fright, noteworthiness, is a reality. That if you're trying to think in some way outside the menu there at the table, it's just almost impossible. I guess on that positive note, we could look for another news item. Hey, listen, anybody can think for themselves. All these ideas about impossible and all sermons and all that, you already knew years ago, you know. It's just talk. I mean, if you had any faith in that, you'd still be at temple or the church or somewhere, or you're home with your parents or somewhere, people saying, wait a minute. And from their mouth would spill the gems of plagiarism, cliches, aphorisms, truisms, maxims, epithets. Anything that somebody says you can't do, or anything that anybody says you shouldn't do, it was a news item, or maybe it was just something I heard. It said that any truism, or aphorism, or words of wisdom coming from the collective, but any kind of aphorism, any kind of sermon, any kind of allegory that makes you feel good on the basis of making you feel bad, which is about all religions, which is about all of the messages from all institutions. You follow that if you can do it without any belligerency, without any partisan thought. It's just the nature of them. It's the nature of life, but it's the nature especially of the institutions representing the collective interest, or the interest of the collective, is that anything that they say that sounds to be cheer you up, right in the middle of it is to make you feel good by feeling bad. They got a follow-up always, of course, like, well, I know that's the way it appears now, but wait till you die. Which is all right for those who've never figured out what it would be to actually hold yourself hostage and get right to the point. But at any rate, if it was a news item indeed, it pointed out that any aphorism, truism, message that makes you feel good by making you feel bad was like a jelly-filled Bismarck. Some of you know what that is and where it came from, but it said, but in this case, it was that they stuffed the old man full of crap rather than full of jelly. It is like all encouraging messages that what appear to be encouraging messages of all kinds that are available through the collective that sound as though, here's the good news. And you think, well, by God, I've been waiting. And they tell you the good news, and right there in the center of it, when you bite into it, if you can think, you bite into it, and you think, Well, God Almighty, thanks a lot. Because what you end up with, if you bite down on it and try to chew it, and it sounds like, here's the good news. Well, let me pick the general Judaic Christian just in this widest sense. It's like, here's the good news, folks. Man is just a terrible creature. Yeah? But hey, the gods understand it and everything's all right. Well, okay. Except not in your lifetime. And it's always the feeling, of course, other people see it, to use my example, which is not untoward, it'd be an ordinary person's feeling that they think, oh, I wish they would shut up. They went too far. At first they said, here's the good news. The gods are interested in you and they know your problems. And you think, well, hey, I'm glad to hear that. And they say, no, that wasn't in the sentence. It was just a comma. And then they say, of course, you won't realize it in this lifetime. And so the ordinary feeling is like, God, that'd been all right if they'd shut up before that last part. But if you get good, back to the example, is rather than blaming it on them, it's like you and it's like the Bismarck. That it looks fine, but what you wish, if you had known this beforehand, you wish that you had quit biting just as soon as you put it in your mouth, or maybe as soon as you smelled it, or as soon as you looked at it and thought, boy, that looks good. Because once you bite into it, how you going to get the taste of crap out of your mouth? Because for some reason, life filled it, with cow patties instead of jelly. Well, I was trying to leave on a positive note on that news item, wasn't I? Well, the thing about the positive note, I guess we've had enough time. There is no way to have a positive note that does not have a drawback to it. Not if you're dealing with energy that is based on AC current, that is based on apparent polarized choices of whatever kind. Then there can't be such a thing if the donut looks good, if the Bismarck looks good. And it's filled, or that's the whole definition of a Bismarck, or a jelly-filled donut, per se, by its own definition, it's filled with something. If it looks good, and it looks appetizing out here, you can count on this. No matter what terms you want to use, you can count on it tasting other than it looks. In the same way that you can count on if there's a sign somewhere that says, come in here and we'll make your mouth feel better. You can count on the fact if you go in there, it's going to be the Marquis de Sade's grandson with the equipment for root canal work. Or if it's a sign, religion, the good news religion. And you think, well, by God, it's about time. I haven't been feeling good, and you rush inside. You can count on this. As soon as you get inside, somebody's going to go, and you're going to leave feeling worse than you were when you went in. It's just the way it is. So if it looks good out here, it's going to taste otherwise. There's the problem I was trying to point out, me even making a little joke of, which was obviously a joke, of saying, well, we'll leave on a positive note regarding this news item. There's no way to. Not verbally, and not if it was just us talking, if it was just ordinary people, and it was that kind of normal two-way currency, weighted currency between people, because there's no way that you can ever politely extricate yourself from sitting at that rigged poker table. If you try to get up, you're committing suicide. If you do ever get up, without it being of your own volition, it's going to be when you're dead and they're carrying you out anyway. So you can sit there at the table. Do you see the point I was making about if it looks good, it's going to taste bad, and if it looks bad, it's going to... You can sit at the table and say, I can't stand this anymore. It could be worse. From that same view. There is no way to leave on a positive note in any news item, because all the news items were made up by partisan energy. And so you can't say, well, here's the good news. You can say it, but there's always a comma after it. And I don't mean it's somebody's fault. All you got to do is try it yourself. You try to think, what's the best news I can think of? And you can think of it, and at the ordinary level, and you get through thinking about it. Well, hey, what if we don't actually die? What if, when it's all over, just immediately, you're in a great place? What if that's true? God, boy, I feel good. But you'll immediately think, Jesus, I'm going nuts. I had a feeling nobody particularly likes that one. The point is, you do it to yourself. It's not somebody else. It's the energy that runs life, including the human intellect. In other words, if you tried to think of the greatest thing, the most positive, optimistic thing you can think about, and you think about it, nobody else influencing you, no institutions talking to you, you think it on your own. And you think, boy, I feel much better. And by the time you can smile and go to get a glass of water, what are you going to think? You'll think, boy, am I a dreamer. Well, I know it's running over that twice didn't make anybody feel any better. All right, we'll pretend to just move on. Well, here's a couple of items having to do with the ever-popular Milwaukee team, the Hormones. Well, that's something else. Anyway, it's about hormones. First item regarding hormones says that hormones have a great memory, and many people think, yeah, and I wish they'd forget about me. And another one here says, the hormonal infantry fight for power while the cerebral generals explain that it's all over principles. Yeah, well, here's another one. The reason that hormones can't think is if they could, then every time they would hear men talk about something being somebody else's, their imagination, then hormones would laugh so hard they'd bust their gut and hurt themselves. What would seem to be hormones thinking would be not unduly, comparably put as being the intelligence of the collective. Because locally, the collective can only think about that which is pretty darn directly connected to hormones. Grab the most important, educated, or the most educated, ordinary person in the collective. In some great esoteric field, philosophy, finances, economics, meteorology. And wake the person up in the middle of the night real quick and say, what's the most important thing to think about? And unless he's already so mature his hormones are dying, then this guy's going to holler, sex, food. You woke him up in the middle of the night before he could get his wits together, you understand? Did I make that clear? All right, look at what seems to take up most of humanity's. At the good, ordinary, sane level, most of their intellectual attention is focused on what? Well, you don't go by the news, go by the newspapers. I don't have any figures here. The news magazines, the news programs on radio and television. What is most of what's being covered? Is it esoteric? Is it intellectual matters? Well, as opposed to things that directly, physically affect humanity. The weather, sports. And when I say important, it's not that the games are important, but what you're thinking about, you'll sit there, people do, educated people, and they sit there staring at a box, either with a picture or just sound coming out of it, and hear things read. And now for the scores. 7-12. 14-17, 36-9, and people with college education go, The only reason they'll put up with it, the only reason they're interested in it, is it is very closely connected to that which is subcortical. It is down to the hormonal level, pushing and shoving, playing games, jumping up and throwing balls, running, tripping somebody else, then running faster. Politics, which is just kind of athletics, wearing long pants and a suit and tie, but you're kind of pushing people around. Wars, the weather takes up a lot of the time, which all of you already know. They can't predict the weather. I mean, the most they can do is the guy, it comes time to, now for the weather forecast, he'll run outside and hold his hand out the window just before the camera gets on him and says, well, My prediction is that it's probably raining now. That's it. The rest of it is just a dream like everything else. But people will sit there for 5 minutes or on whatever it is, an hour television show, and they'll listen to 5 minutes out of that, 5 minutes out of their life, that's absolutely meaningless insofar as this means something, which I guess is self-evident if it's meaningless. What ordinary people think about, I got way off the track, I know, but what else is new? Well, you thought I might have. Is what seems to be the thinking of the collective. Ordinary, sane people, it has to be, relatively speaking, it is, relatively speaking, closer, more directly tied to the life of the body, to the non-intellectual life of man. If you stretch it too far, well, notice the news. We're not picking on the collective because the collective knows what it's doing. Life knows what it's doing. Notice, turn on, I guess TV news is the best example, so me using papers and all. Besides the sports, I have an hour show, I don't know what they turn over. 5-10 minutes to sports. 5 or 10 minutes to the weather, all right? Then you think, well, there's other important things. Nowadays, they'll spend over 5 or 10 minutes reviews for the arts, films, other TV shows. Do they ever devote any time to reviews of ideas? Do they review current philosophy? Do they bring on some new philosopher, the latest, wonderkind in Harvard or Princeton that says, I have a new philosophy? Do they review? Do they critique? Do they report on matters that are beginning to stretch, that are just almost have no relationship to the body? And the answer, of course, is no. But they never have. It's not that life's going downhill. They do not review thought. They do not critique it. They do not report scores on it. They don't report that there was a philosophical debate at Cambridge this afternoon, and we'd like to report that the blue team won over the red team a score of 8.9 to 7. And all the people there sitting at the TV, and all the anchor people, they chuckle and laugh and go, well, that old Dr. So-and-so, he hit another home run, did he? There is no such thing. If you're not thinking in some way having to do with what the collective already thinks, and you do understand that what the collective thinks, what humanity, from top to bottom, the sanity of it, the sane part of humanity, what they think about is there's almost no operational usefulness to even try and describe anything that the collective thinks about that is even 1 or 2 steps removed from physical dancing, from sports, pushing each other around politically, fashion, entertainment. Which is why I'm saying the collective does not think about thoughts. They think about that which is run still primarily by hormones, which you can't get away from it, but that's still what they're thinking about, still what the mind is driven by. So if that be true, what I was trying to get you to see is where are you going to turn? What are you going to pick up? Who are you going to go listen to? What are you going to read? What kind of movie? You're going to go see what kind of symphony, what kind of music, what kind of painting, what kind of message, what kind of lecture somewhere are you going to go to hear that is even 1 or 2 steps removed from sex, from shelter, from eating, from fashion, which is sex. In other words, away from hormones. Now, it's obviously 1 or 2 steps away from hormones because people, as a rule, at least not unless they're wearing a dirty overcoat and a hat pulled down, they don't necessarily go out to hear a lecture on pornography. Of course, they did. I guess the lecture would get killed quite quick because the people in the audience go, I didn't come to hear a lecture on it. Came to see some. The point is, where can you go that there would be anything said that was not directly tied, almost that closely, to the life of man's hormones, as opposed to calling that the subcortical life of the body physically? Then we'd call it above the cortex, above that kind of line would be whatever would be non-hormonal driven. It would be thinking about the life of thought. Where are you going to go find it? This is not a challenge. It's not for me to, as you know, to keep asking questions. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to find it? Well, nowhere. But thank God I have this course for sale here. If you'll order this. It's not that. It's just for you to see that the collective has no need for such food, that life is not feeding itself on the level that the mind has to deal with thinking about thought. That where the collective still thinks how it feeds itself is by eating its own feet. It hadn't gotten much further. It's quite adequate. It keeps civilization going. It fuels itself, but the head is yet to start eating itself. All you got to do is eat your feet and you'll stay alive. It's that kind of incestuous genetic cannibalism, but all you got to do is eat yourself at the lowest level. That is, you and the other cows. That's all you got to know. What do people want to know? Well, I want to know who Elizabeth Taylor's sleeping with. I want to know if our new president actually was in a menage a trois. I want to know what the new fashions will be. That's what people want to know. They're still eating humanity collectively, the herd. Is all you've got to do is cannibalize your own feet. That'll keep the brain alive. But notice what it does if you took that allegory a little bit further, that you're going to feed the brain by eating your feet and you're strong on your toes. Now let's assume that life knows what it's doing. It's got things arranged, and it'll take you about 6 to 8 years to eat up to just right above the brain stem. You're just about to finally kill yourself here, but by God, it worked just out just right. You lasted just in time that you consumed yourself. But look what you've been feeding yourself. I mean, how do you expect that you're going to improve your brain level by eating toenails? By eating ankles even. All right, knees. It's the same thing as thinking, or if you can see the question is, how are you going to go to the collective? How are you going to the herd and say, tell me how to get out of here? And the herd says, sure, we'll tell you. Right. As you're going to whoever's running that rigged poker game and say, hey, this game's rigged and I want out of here. I mean, it's cleaning you out constantly. You continue to put money on the table. Yeah, they're going to say, you're right, you're a nice boy, I like your looks. There's a back door right over there. That's right, son, hold your breath. There's a back door over there, just like a flying saucer's going to land in your backyard tonight and holler, Lorenzo, is that you in there? We've been waiting on you. The time has come. Yeah. That and Publishers Clearinghouse is looking for you right now. They got to check. The collective stays alive. There is an absolute form, or another way to look at civilization is like a train that has the ability to continually lay track in front of itself. Is the same thing. Is it in one person's lifetime intellectually like a train, that train, or a merry-go-round? It doesn't really have to go anywhere. It just seems to have to be on the move. And so if you're feeding your brain, if you're speaking to the individual inside the collective, if you're feeding your brain off eating your feet, that is, you're eating the same crap that's on everybody else's menu. Now, you can say you're not, but if you're practicing cannibalism, which is, you can say, well, I'm not practicing cannibalism because the whole world right now believes X is true politically. Ha ha, and I believe just the opposite. Oh, you rebellious devil, you old precious rebel cow. I'll teach them. It's the same thing as you're sitting at the table and you try to tell somebody, hey, I know this game's rigged. And they go, with feigned horror. What are you going to do about it? Well, I just want you to know I know about it. I'm nobody's fool. Which is all right until you realize the fact that 10 years later you're still sitting at the table. So nobody wants to think about that. You're not just a fool. You're a fool now with some kind of 10 years worth of dumb patina on you. Because you admitted that 10 years ago you knew you were being took. And now we walk back, or you walk back 10 years later and thought, well, I thought I was dumb, but I had no idea of my splendid, sterling level of stupidity because I knew I was dumb and being robbed 10 years ago. And by God, here I am still. Well, it's good that you can depend on some things. That is what keeps the collective alive intellectually, is that they eat their own feet. That is what sometimes I refer to as plagiarism and cliches and et cetera, or it's being apparently original. But you're original only on the basis that you're standing on the shoulders of your fellow cows. That's as far as you can go. It would be too far to go any further. It would be too drastic to think anything too differently. So the individual, just like the herd, ends up feeding the brain by eating the feet. That is, you're feeding, at a collective level, you're feeding neural activity off of hormonal activity. One more time, obviously, I'm not trying to speak in some extremely strange way, because as long as you're alive in this universe, hormones are going to keep you alive. Sexual hormones are always going to affect your thinking. Being hungry will affect your thinking. You've got to be an idiot not to know that. Not having enough sleep will affect your thinking. Having too much sleep. So that's always there. But if you're dependent upon feeding the neural level off of nothing but your feet, that is, off of nothing but the basic hormones of sex, the basic hormonal drives, the physical drives that keep the body per se alive, if that's all that you're dealing with, if all you're going to do is eat your feet, which is eating everybody else's feet, that is, you're eating off the menu of the collective, if that's all you're going to do, then I got to ask you the great musical question, what the hell do you expect? Yeah, but I wanted more out of life than this. Well, how much more? Well, a lot more. When did you know this? Well, to tell you the truth, I've suspected this. I felt this way since, I don't know, I was 12 or 13 years old. When did you first realize you were sitting here at the table at a rigged game? About the same time. Well, there's no fooling you, is there? How old are you, sir? Well, I'm down there 60 now. So in other words, they hadn't had you fooled for a long time. No, not hardly. Maybe some of these other clowns. But I knew what was going on, by God, hell, what's it been, 45, 46 years ago. Yes, sirree. Proud to know a man like that. Even prouder to be one, isn't it? You don't have to answer. Anybody follow the whole point of that little drama? All thought that is run off the collective menu, all thought that is directly, relatively speaking, that is still mostly directly run and connected to the hormonal drives, has no other choice than to be partisan, because the body politic, the body physical of humanity, the body socially of humanity is partisan to live. Thank God. You are partisan to live. You are belligerent to live. You are aligned to live. So that's established. If you're sane. If you're not so aligned, you are literally insane. So as long as you're tied to the hormones that are properly tied to be partisan to live, then this, by its very nature, if it's running off gasoline that is partisan, then this is going to be partisan. That is, it is always going to be weighted. It is always going to be looking with a great insight of monocular vision. It has no choice. And for a person to think, well, dealing with the information available to everyone else, I will in some way remix it, put it back together, deconstruct it, reconstruct it, put my own spin on it, and I'll come up with the truth. But meanwhile, while I'm working on it, do me another hand, please. And would you bring me another drink with some booze in it this time? You're not fooling me. How long have they been bringing you water drinks? Well, since I've been sitting here, but at least I've known about it. Was there a final news item? Yeah, but I hate to read it. We don't leave with the blues, do we? Is this known as stretching it in show business? Well, here's a related item. As long as a man's genetics have first call on him, which is just what we're talking about, before his individual neural activity, the dead will forever speak to him, and he will love it, and he will listen. you are back to another one of the news items. As long as you will let genetics, as long as you will let the collective's identification of itself run what you think, even affect it, that when you think of you, as everybody does, now this is natural to start with, but every time you think about you think about Jewishness, Catholicism, whiteness, yellowness, Spaniardness. Don't write me. As long as you identify yourself, or female, male, as long as when you think about you think about some group, some aspect of the collective, then the dead will forever talk to you. You'll forever be civilized. And to be civilized is to be a kind of cow that has faith in tradition, whether it be religious, political, racial, cultural. And to have faith in tradition is what? I'll tell you what it is since you asked. It is cows standing starkly together, bright-eyed, eyes getting closer and closer together the longer you stay in the herd. But it's the cows saying to one another and themselves, faith in tradition, reverence, extreme reverence for our ancestors, notwithstanding the fact that they're the ones that set you down at the table in a rigged game. No. But faith and tradition is the cows all saying, the collective cows all saying, yes, the best is behind us. See, the little drama, the little piece of business there is you smile because there you sit at the table, you can't get up. And so what's one of the best things to believe anytime you have to intellectually or verbally face up to it is, well, they threw us in the garden. It's been downhill. Yes, the best is still behind us, but maybe it'll get better when I die and I go into reverse in some way. And then, of course, hopefully nobody at the table says, what? Or no, that is, nobody knew that some part of your brain lapses unaccountably into some ephemeral moment of real lucidity and goes, what in the hell are you talking about? That's why it's good to listen to the dead if you're going to sit at the table. That's why it's good to have tradition. That's why it's good to identify yourself. And they say, why do you keep sitting here? Well, my forefathers sat here. My forefathers suffered so that I could sit here. My forefathers helped rig this game. People of my sex have always sat here. People of my sex have always been pushed around and cheated. People of my nationality, whatever it is. See, as long as you do that, you've got some kind of enemy, you've got some kind of excuse. And there's no chance, thank God, that you'll ever even accidentally start to think. Now, I don't have time to think, I'm Baptist. I'm sorry, I can't think, I'm Italian. What the hell do you want? We're up to important business. Feels like a teddy bear.